September 2nd, 1666. Just after midnight, Pudding Lane, a dry wind moves through the narrow streets of London, slipping between timber-framed houses that lean toward one another like conspirators. The summer has been long and rainless. The wood is brittle. The air carries the smell of tar rope and the slow-moving Thames. Somewhere in the darkness, a spark catches inside the bakery of Thomas Fariner. Flames begin as a glow beneath the door. Within minutes, they climb the walls. Within an hour, they leap across the street. Church bells begin to ring, but the wind is stronger than the water buckets. Roofs ignite in sequence. The sky turns the color of iron heated in a forge. By dawn, London is no longer a city of stone and timber, but a horizon of fire. St. Paul's Cathedral stands silhouetted in smoke. The river reflects a red sky, yet this was not the first time London had burned, nor would it be the last. In the year AD 43, nearly 16 centuries before the Great Fire, Roman warships cut through the gray waters of the Channel. Emperor Claudius had ordered the conquest of Britannia, not merely for glory, but for control of trade, metals, and prestige at the edge of the known world. Roman legions landed on the southern shores and began the steady advance inland. They did not come seeking London. London did not yet exist. What they found was a bend in the River Thames, a tidal crossing point where the water narrowed and the banks rose firm enough to build upon. It was not the largest settlement in the region, nor the oldest, but it was practical, and Rome valued practicality above all. By AD 47, a wooden bridge stretched across the Thames. Around it rose warehouses, workshops, bathhouses, and barracks. The Romans named it Londinium. From the beginning, Londinium was a place of commerce. Amphorae filled with wine from Gaul, olive oil from Hispania, and pottery from Germania passed through its docks. Coins bearing the image of the emperor changed hands in busy markets. The straight lines of Roman engineering imposed order upon the damp island soil, roads radiating outward like spokes from a wheel, connecting the new town to Colchester, St. Albans, and beyond. But empire is never uncontested. In AD 60 or 61, a revolt erupted under Boudica, queen of the Iceni. Roman authority in Britain faltered as native tribes united against occupation. Londinium, still young and lightly defended, was abandoned by the Roman governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus when he judged it impossible to hold. The rebels burned it to the ground. Archaeological layers reveal a thick band of red ash beneath modern London, evidence of that destruction. Contemporary Roman historian Tacitus wrote of slaughter and devastation, estimating tens of thousands killed across the province. Londinium vanished in flames scarcely 15 years after its birth. Yet Rome rebuilt. This was the Roman way. Stone replaced timber. A defensive wall rose around the settlement in the late 2nd century, stretching nearly 2 miles, punctuated by gates and towers. A grand forum and basilica dominated the center, at the time one of the largest north of the Alps. An amphitheater hosted spectacles of combat and display. Public baths steamed even in winter. By the 3rd century, Londinium had become the administrative and commercial heart of Roman Britain. Ships moved constantly along the Thames. The river became the artery of imperial supply, carrying grain, metal, wool, and soldiers. Latin inscriptions marked civic life. Mosaic floors depicted gods in geometry beneath the feet of merchants and magistrates. Yet even as it prospered, the edges of empire began to fray. From the late 3rd century onward, Roman Britain faced increasing instability. Saxon pirates raided coastal settlements. Political authority in Rome fractured through civil wars and competing emperors. In AD 410, the Roman administration formally withdrew from Britain, instructing local leaders to defend themselves. The legions departed. Without imperial support, Londinium's population declined. Trade diminished. Public buildings fell into disrepair. The great forum emptied. Roofs collapsed. The once polished stones gathered moss. For generations, the city retreated within its walls. Some areas were abandoned entirely. The ordered geometry of Rome faded into a quieter landscape of scattered communities and lingering memory. But the river remained. The Thames continued to rise and fall with the tide, indifferent to politics. It carried small boats instead of imperial cargo. It flowed past crumbling walls and silent bathhouses. Even in decline, it offered what it always had: connection. It was along that river, amid the remnants of Roman stone, that a new identity would slowly emerge: Anglo-Saxon, mercantile, and restless. The empire had withdrawn, but the location still mattered. Trade routes still converged. The crossing point still held value. London did not disappear. It waited. In the centuries that followed Rome's withdrawal, the old city within its walls did not immediately recover its former scale. Instead, life shifted slightly westward. By the 7th century, a new settlement known as Londonwick emerged along the Strand, outside the crumbling Roman defenses. It was not imperial in design. It was organic. Timber halls, thatched roofs, open markets facing the river. This was Anglo-Saxon London. Trade once again defined its purpose. Archaeological evidence reveals glassware from the continent, corn stones from the Rhineland, and coins minted in Frankish territories. The Thames returned to prominence as a commercial highway. Merchants sailed from northern Europe, carrying furs, slaves, cloth, and metalwork. London's geography, its tidal depth, its inland position yet maritime access, made it inevitable as a trading hub. But vulnerability accompanied opportunity. Beginning in the late 8th century, Viking raids struck the coasts and rivers of Britain. By 842, Anglo-Saxon chroniclers recorded that London had been attacked. In 851, a larger Danish force wintered on the Thames. The city's prosperity made it a prize. By 886, Alfred the Great recaptured London from Danish control. Recognizing its strategic value, he ordered the old Roman walls repaired and reoccupied. Settlement moved back inside the fortified perimeter. The city was reorganized, its streets relaid, its defenses strengthened. London once again became a fortified stronghold, linking the emerging Kingdom of England. The pattern was becoming clear: destruction, adaptation, renewal. In 1066, another decisive moment reshaped London's destiny. William, Duke of Normandy, defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. As Norman forces advanced, London stood as the symbolic heart of English authority. Rather than sack it outright, William moved carefully. He circled the city, securing key crossings and cutting supply routes. London submitted. On Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The coronation cemented London's status not merely as a trading town, but as the seat of royal power. To secure his hold, William ordered the construction of a great stone fortress along the Thames, the Tower of London. Its white keep rose above the river, visible to merchants and subjects alike. It was both protection and warning. Stone began to replace timber. Norman architecture reshaped the skyline. The city expanded. Beyond its Roman footprint, markets multiplied. Guilds formed, organized associations of craftsmen regulating trade, quality, and price. The medieval city grew dense and layered, its streets narrow and winding, its population increasingly diverse. By the 13th century, London had become the largest city in England, with perhaps 40,000 to 60,000 inhabitants, a vast number by medieval standards. It was a center of law, finance, and royal administration. Westminster evolved into the site of Parliament. The Magna Carta of 1215, though sealed at Runnymede upriver, affirmed certain liberties that directly referenced London's ancient privileges as a city. Commerce thrived, while exports enriched merchants. The Hanseatic League established a presence, linking London to Baltic trade networks. The Thames bustled with ships unloading barrels, cloth, spices, and wine. The river was both marketplace and highway, yet prosperity carried hidden fragility. In 1348, ships arriving from continental Europe brought more than goods. They carried the Black Death. Within months, plague spread through London's tight quarters. Contemporary records suggest mortality rates of perhaps 40 to 50%. Churchyards overflowed. New burial grounds were hastily consecrated beyond city walls. The soundscape changed: less market noise, more funeral bells. London shrank, but it did not collapse. Labor shortages altered economic structures. Survivors found increased bargaining power. Social hierarchies shifted. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 marched into London itself, demonstrating the city's central role in national upheaval. Royal authority and popular anger collided within its streets. By the late medieval period, London had become indispensable to England's political and economic life. Its population recovered. Its guild halls grew grander. Its merchants financed voyages that would soon extend beyond Europe. The Thames remained constant, flowing past the Tower, beneath London Bridge, lined with wharves and cranes. It carried not only goods, but ambition. As the 15th century closed, England stood on the threshold of transformation. Dynastic wars had ended. The Tudor dynasty emerged. Overseas exploration beckoned. Printing presses multiplied ideas. London, compact yet energetic, prepared to step onto a larger stage. The city that Rome had founded, that Vikings had raided, that Normans had fortified, was no longer provincial. It was becoming the nucleus of a kingdom poised for expansion. The River Thames had always been London's quiet architect. Long before Parliament debated within Westminster or monarchs processed through its streets, the river determined where ships could dock, where bridges could stand, where wealth could gather. Its tides rose twice daily, carrying seawater deep inland, allowing ocean-going vessels to anchor far from the open coast. In an age when roads were slow and dangerous, water was speed, water was commerce, water was survival. By the 16th century, under the Tudors, the Thames had become the engine of England's expanding ambition. Timber from the Baltic, wine from France, sugar from the Caribbean, and spices from Asia passed along its currents. The Pool of London grew crowded with masts. Dockworkers unloaded cargo by hand, forming human chains along wooden wharves. Customs officials recorded imports with increasing precision, revealing a city whose trade was multiplying each decade. The river did more than sustain London. It projected it outward. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, ships departing the Thames sailed toward North America, West Africa, and India. The establishment of the East India Company in 1600 transformed London into the administrative heart of a growing global network. Warehouses near the docks stored tea, silk, cotton, and porcelain. Insurance markets developed to protect maritime ventures. Lloyd's Coffee House, founded in the late 17th century, became a gathering point for merchants and underwriters, laying foundations for modern financial systems. Through the Thames, London ceased to be merely English. It became imperial. But power in London was not confined to docks and counting houses. It also concentrated in stone buildings west of the old city walls. Westminster evolved into the political core of the nation. Here stood the royal palace, the abbey, and eventually the Houses of Parliament. The execution of Charles I in 1649 occurred outside the banqueting house on Whitehall, a moment when the authority of monarchy was publicly severed before a watching crowd. That act reverberated across Europe. For a brief period, England became a republic under Oliver Cromwell. London witnessed experiments in governance, military rule, and religious reform. Then in 1660, monarchy returned. The city adapted, as it always had. Power shifted, but London remained its stage. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 further defined its political character. William and Mary accepted the English crown under conditions that strengthened parliamentary authority. The Bill of Rights in 1689 formalized limits on royal power. These developments were not abstract constitutional changes. They unfolded in London's chambers, debated by men whose decisions would influence governance across continents. Thus the city embodied two parallel forces: commerce along the river and legislation in Westminster. And yet beneath this growing confidence lay vulnerability. The city's medieval street plan remained cramped and combustible. Sanitation was primitive. Population density increased through the 17th century, rising toward 500,000 inhabitants. The bills of mortality, weekly records of deaths, reveal recurring outbreaks of disease. In 1665, plague returned with devastating force. Estimates suggest that around 70,000 people, perhaps more, died within a single year. Entire parishes were marked with red crosses, and the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." Trade slowed. Wealthy families fled to the countryside. The river, once a channel of prosperity, carried away bodies for burial downstream. The following year, fire would finish what plague had weakened. In these cycles of growth and catastrophe, London's identity hardened. It was a city repeatedly tested by disease, by politics, by flame. Yet each crisis left behind new structures, financial institutions, constitutional principles, rebuilt streets of brick rather than timber. The Thames continued to move between them all, reflecting towers, ships, and smoke alike. By the early 19th century, the rhythm of London changed again. Steam replaced sail. Iron replaced timber. The Thames, once crowded with wooden masts, now carried black-hulled steamships that move against the tide without waiting for wind. Along its banks, shipyards hammered day and night. The Industrial Revolution did not begin in London, but it transformed London more visibly than perhaps any other city in Europe. Railway lines pushed inward from every direction. Paddington, Euston, King's Cross, Waterloo, each station a cathedral of iron and glass. Between 1801 and 1901, London's population exploded from roughly 1 million to over 6 million. It became the largest city in the world. But industrial greatness cast long shadows. The East End grew dense with dock workers, factory laborers, and migrants from Ireland and Eastern Europe. Housing was overcrowded. Sewage flowed untreated into the Thames. In the summer of 1858, the Great Stink overwhelmed Parliament itself. The smell of the polluted river grew so intense that curtains soaked in chloride of lime were hung in the House of Commons. It was a humiliation for an imperial capital. Engineer Joseph Bazalgette responded with one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects of the century, a vast underground sewer system that reshaped the riverbanks and dramatically reduced disease. London's survival increasingly depended on engineering as much as commerce. The city became both symbol and contradiction, imperial confidence alongside urban poverty. Charles Booth's poverty maps of the 1880s documented entire districts colored black to indicate extreme deprivation. Yet within the same city rose grand museums, the Royal Albert Hall, and monuments celebrating empire. The Thames carried goods from India, Africa, Australia, and Canada, while in Whitechapel families struggled to afford bread. Then came the 20th century, and with it a new kind of threat. In 1915 and 1916, German Zeppelin airships crossed the North Sea and dropped bombs on London. For the first time, the city faced sustained attack from the air. Casualties were limited compared to later conflicts, but psychologically the impact was profound. London was no longer insulated by its island geography. That lesson returned with devastating clarity in 1940. On September 7th, German aircraft launched a sustained bombing campaign against the docks and industrial areas of East London. The Blitz would continue for months. Over 43,000 civilians across Britain were killed during the campaign. London bore the heaviest share. Entire streets vanished overnight. St. Paul's Cathedral, photographed standing amid smoke, became a symbol of endurance. The Thames again reflected fire, just as it had in 1666. Yet, even amid destruction, daily life persisted. Londoners sheltered in underground stations. Buses ran. Parliament continued to sit, even after the Commons chamber was destroyed. Prime Minister Winston Churchill walked through bombed neighborhoods, aware that the city's morale carried strategic significance. After the war, London faced reconstruction on a scale not seen since the Great Fire. Housing estates replaced bomb terraces. The docks, once the beating heart of empire, began a slow decline as container shipping shifted trade patterns. In 1951, the Festival of Britain celebrated national recovery along the South Bank, signaling optimism after years of austerity. The empire that filled London's warehouses gradually dissolved through decolonization, yet the people of former colonies arrived in increasing numbers. In 1948, the empire windrush docked at Tilbury, carrying passengers from the Caribbean. They and those who followed would reshape London's cultural landscape. South Asian, African, and Caribbean communities added languages, religions, and cuisines to the city's identity. The river still flowed through it all, past new glass towers rising at Canary Wharf, past the old dome of St. Paul's, beneath bridges rebuilt in steel and concrete. In 1986, financial deregulation known as the Big Bang transformed the City of London into a global financial powerhouse. Screens replaced paper. Trading floors hummed with electronic signals rather than shouted bids. Yet, vulnerability never vanished entirely. On July 7, 2005, coordinated bombing struck London's transport system, killing 52 people. Once again, the city absorbed shock and continued. Across 2 millennia, London's character has been defined by tension, wealth and poverty, liberty and authority, destruction and renewal. The Thames has witnessed it all. Roman barges, Viking longships, East India Company vessels, steamers, warships, container ships. It has reflected flames, factory smoke, and the glow of modern skylines. And in moments of crisis, it has mirrored not only fire, but resolve. The greatest test of that resolve came in the autumn of 1940, when the survival of Britain itself seemed to rest upon the endurance of its capital. September 7th, 1940. Late afternoon, the sky above the Thames estuary fills with movement, dark formations advancing in precise lines. Nearly 350 German bombers, escorted by more than 600 fighter aircraft, cross the English coast and turn toward London. Their target is not symbolic at first. It is practical. The docks of the East End, warehouses, oil storage tanks, rail junctions, the arteries of supply that sustain both city and nation. At 4:43 p.m., the first bombs fall on the Surrey commercial docks. Within minutes, the riverfront erupts. Oil ignites. Timber yards blaze. Smoke coils upward in thick columns visible for miles. Fire brigades struggle to reach the waterfront as debris blocks roads. By nightfall, more than 1,000 tons of high explosive and incendiary bombs have struck the capital. The Thames reflect a horizon of flames stretching nearly 20 miles. This was no isolated raid. It marked a strategic shift. Until early September, the Luftwaffe had concentrated attacks on RAF airfields and radar stations in southern England, seeking to cripple Britain's air defenses ahead of a planned invasion, Operation Sea Lion. But mounting German losses and a British bombing raid on Berlin prompted Adolf Hitler to redirect efforts toward London itself. The aim was multifaceted: destroy industry, disrupt governance, and break civilian morale. Instead of knocking Britain out of the war, the assault would bind the city more tightly to the conflict's outcome. That first night, around 430 civilians were killed. Thousands were injured. Entire neighborhoods of the East End burned unchecked for hours. Firefighters worked amid collapsing warehouses and ruptured gas mains. Water pressure failed in places as mains were damaged. Sparks carried by wind ignited fresh blazes far from the docks. The following evening, the bombers returned. And the next, by mid-September, nightly raids had become routine. Air raid sirens wailed across the city at dusk. Families carried blankets and thermoses toward underground stations, descending escalators into tunnels never designed for habitation. Platforms became dormitories. Children slept beneath tiled ceilings while trains continued to pass on adjacent tracks. Official records indicate that between September 7th and November 2nd, 1940, London was bombed for 57 consecutive nights. Casualties mounted. On September 15th alone, later commemorated as Battle of Britain Day, the Luftwaffe launched massive daylight attacks. RAF Fighter Command intercepted them in fierce engagements overhead. That day, German aircraft losses were significant enough to force reconsideration of sustained daylight bombing. Yet the night raids continued. Churches, factories, homes, and landmarks suffered damage. The Guildhall burned. Buckingham Palace was struck multiple times. Even the Houses of Parliament were not spared. In May 1941, the Commons Chamber will be destroyed by fire following a bombing raid. Yet amid destruction, symbols endured. On December 29, 1940, one of the most intense raids of the Blitz took place. Incendiaries rained down in such numbers that the night became known as the Second Great Fire of London. More than 100,000 bombs fell across the city. The historic district around St. Paul's Cathedral burned fiercely. Photographs captured the dome rising above smoke and flame, a solitary silhouette in a burning landscape. The image traveled far beyond Britain. It suggested continuity, survival, a refusal to collapse. Strategically, the Blitz failed to achieve its primary objective. While damage to housing and industry was severe, over 1 million homes damaged or destroyed by war's end, production did not cease. Aircraft factories dispersed manufacturing to reduce vulnerability. Civil defense systems improved coordination. The government implemented rationing and relocation programs for children. Psychologically, the bombing forged what came to be called the Blitz spirit. Diaries and mass observation reports from the period reveal exhaustion, fear, and grief, but also determination. Londoners adapted to blackout conditions, to shattered windows taped in crisscross patterns, to the constant rumble of anti-aircraft fire. The Thames, once more, reflected burning buildings as it had in 1666. But this time, the flames came from the sky. By May 1941, German focus shifted eastward toward the Soviet Union. The sustained bombing of London diminished. In total, more than 30,000 Londoners were killed during the Blitz, with tens of thousands more injured. Entire districts were reshaped. Yet the city had not broken, and in its endurance lay a turning point, not only for London, but for the war itself. By the spring of 1941, the pattern of destruction had become grimly familiar. Sirens at dusk, searchlights combing the sky, the deep concussive thud of high explosives followed by the crackling hiss of incendiaries. Yet beneath that routine lay a strategic reality increasingly evident to both sides. The Luftwaffe had failed to neutralize fighter command. British radar stations remained operational. Aircraft production, dispersed across the country, continued to rise. In 1940 alone, Britain produced more than 15,000 aircraft, outpacing German expectations. The bombing of London, intended to crush morale and cripple logistics, had instead granted the RAF crucial time to recover. The decisive moment in this shift had come weeks earlier, on September 15, 1940. That Sunday, large German formations approached London in daylight. RAF squadrons scrambled from airfields across southern England. Dogfights erupted high above the capital. Observers on rooftops watched contrails twist against the blue sky. By evening, German losses were heavy, dozens of aircraft destroyed or damaged. Intelligence intercepts revealed growing concern within the Luftwaffe command. 2 days later, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The planned invasion of Britain would not proceed. London's endurance had strategic weight. The city was not merely a target. It was the political nerve center of resistance. Parliament continued to meet even after the Commons Chamber was destroyed on May 10, 1941. Members gathered in the House of Lords instead, maintaining legislative continuity amid rubble. Winston Churchill insisted that visible governance signaled national stability. Bombing raids continued through that May night with extraordinary intensity. More than 700 German aircraft attacked. The British Museum suffered damage. The chamber of the House of Commons burned. Nearly 1,500 civilians were killed across the country in a single evening, one of the highest tolls of the war. Yet even this did not halt administration, production, or communication. Civil defense structures matured under pressure. Over 5 million Londoners regularly used underground stations as shelters. Anderson and Morrison shelters were distributed for private homes. The auxiliary fire service expanded dramatically, coordinating volunteers alongside professional brigades. Women played crucial roles as ambulance drivers, fire watchers, and factory workers. The city reorganized itself around survival. Statistical records reveal the scale of material damage, approximately 1.4 million houses damaged or destroyed in London by war's end. Entire neighborhoods such as the East End, Stepney, and Poplar bore scars that would last decades. Docks were shattered. Warehouses collapsed into the Thames. Infrastructure lay twisted and charred. And yet essential functions continued. The Port of London, though battered, never ceased operating entirely. Merchant vessels continued to dock under blackout conditions. Supplies for the war effort moved inland. Rail networks were repaired with remarkable speed after bomb strikes. The symbolism was unmistakable. The arteries of the nation remained open. German strategic assessments increasingly acknowledged diminishing returns. Bombing civilian centers had not forced Britain to negotiate. Instead, it hardened public resolve. Diaries from civilians reveal fear and fatigue, but also a growing sense of shared ordeal. The destruction blurred class distinctions. Aristocratic squares and working-class terraces alike were struck. The city that had once symbolized imperial dominance now embodied national defiance. By June 1941, Germany redirected its military focus eastward, launching Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. The sustained bombing of London tapered off. The immediate existential threat of invasion receded, though sporadic raids would continue. The prolonged nightly assault had ended. London stood scarred but functioning. The Blitz had reshaped not only streets but identity. The city emerged from the ordeal with reinforced international stature. It had withstood concentrated aerial assault for 8 months and remained operational. For occupied Europe and for allies abroad, London became proof that resistance was possible. The Thames flowed past blackened wharves and fractured bridges, carrying debris and reflection alike. Its surface no longer glowed red each night, but the memory of fire lingered in brickwork and skyline. The turning point was not a single explosion or a single battle. It was endurance sustained over time, measured in nights survived, in institutions preserved, in production maintained despite bombardment. When the flames subsided, London had not merely survived attack. It had altered the trajectory of the war. The cessation of the Blitz in mid-1941 marked the beginning of London's slow, painstaking recovery. Streets once illuminated by fire now fell under a tentative peace, though the city remained scarred and unsettled. Photographs from the period show entire blocks reduced to rubble, twisted iron beams, and shattered window panes, yet life persisted around them. Bakeries reopened, trams resumed their routes, factories returned to production. London citizens, accustomed to adaptation, began the process of rebuilding. The scale of the damage was unprecedented. Contemporary reports note that over 30,000 civilians have been killed in London alone, with more than 100,000 injured, approximately 1.4 million homes have been damaged or destroyed, leaving hundreds of thousands homeless. Infrastructure along the Thames, the arteries of trade and supply, required major repair. Bridges, quays, and warehouses, some centuries old, had been severely damaged. The city's economic engine faltered, yet remarkably, it never ground to a complete halt. Amid this physical destruction arose social transformation. Women, having filled roles in civil defense, factories, and public services during the war, continued to exercise agency and influence. The class hierarchies of pre-war London were under pressure. Shared suffering in shelters, workplaces, and public spaces foster a sense of collective identity. Contemporary diaries and reports, such as those compiled by mass observation, detail both the hardships and the emerging resilience of ordinary citizens. The government's wartime and post-war initiatives further shaped the city's trajectory. The 1944 Education Act and post-1945 labor government reforms emphasized housing, healthcare, and public welfare, reflecting lessons learned from the wartime experience. Prefabricated temporary homes, nicknamed prefabs, rose rapidly across bombed-out districts. Streets that had been emptied by fire gradually repopulate, giving a new demographic mix as wartime migrations and post-war immigration reshaped London's social fabric. Economically, the Thames remained central, even as shipping patterns began to shift. While traditional docks along the East End had suffered, repair and modernization allowed them to continue functioning. The city's historic position as a mercantile hub facilitated gradual recovery, supported by international trade, reconstruction funds, and domestic demand. London's port activity would eventually decline in the latter half of the 20th century, but in the immediate aftermath, it symbolized continuity amidst upheaval. Culturally, the scars of war did not erase London's rich heritage. Institutions such as the British Museum, St. Paul's Cathedral, and the National Gallery had suffered damage, but were repaired and reopened, serving as symbols of resilience. The preservation of these sites reinforced a narrative that London was more than a collection of buildings. It was an idea, a center of governance, commerce, and culture that survived both human and natural calamity. This period also laid the foundation for London's post-war identity as a city open to global influence. Waves of immigration, most notably the arrival of the Empire Windrush in 1948, brought Caribbean communities into the city, gradually transforming neighborhoods, markets, and cultural life. The integration of new populations was not seamless, but it marked the beginning of modern multicultural London, a city whose diversity will become one of its defining characteristics. Through it all, The Thames flowed unchanged. It reflected the devastation of fire and bombs, the rebuilding of quays and warehouses, and the gradual emergence of new architecture. The river remained both witness and participant, carrying commerce, debris, and the steady pulse of a city reclaiming itself. By the 1950s, London had begun to redefine itself. The ruins of Blitz were slowly replaced with new housing estates and civic projects. The Festival of Britain in 1951 symbolized a nation looking forward. Modernist pavilions lined the South Bank. Futuristic displays celebrated science and engineering, and crowds gathered to witness a capital emerging from war's shadow. The event showcased both architectural ambition and cultural renewal, asserting London's place as a forward-looking city while honoring its historical roots. At the same time, the decline of the traditional docks along the Thames accelerated. Containerization and changing global trade patterns shifted commercial activity eastward and overseas. Once crowded wharves in Stepney and Poplar fell silent, leaving behind skeletal warehouses and quays. Entire communities that had depended on dock labor faced unemployment and displacement, reshaping the socioeconomic fabric of the city. The Thames, which had carried centuries of commerce, now mirrored industrial transformation as shipping technology evolved. Meanwhile, the post-war empire dissolved gradually, yet London remained central to global connections. Waves of immigration transformed neighborhoods, bringing the languages, religions, and cuisines of the Caribbean, South Asia, and Africa. Markets buzzed with spices, textiles, and produce, reflecting the city's new multicultural identity. Brixton, Southall, and Tower Hamlets became emblematic of this change. Neighborhoods where the past met the future, where wartime resilience merged with post-colonial dynamism. The latter decades of the 20th century saw London embracing financial power. The Big Bang of 1986 deregulated the City of London, attracting global capital, investment banks, and financial technology. Canary Wharf rose from former docks, a gleaming testament to reinvention. Modern towers cast shadows over streets that had once been narrow and timbered, juxtaposing medieval history with contemporary ambition. London had become, unequivocally, a global capital of commerce and influence, yet vulnerability remained part of its identity. On July 7, 2005, coordinated terrorist bombings struck the transport network, killing 52 civilians. Once again, the city faced sudden violence. Citizens and authorities adapted swiftly, demonstrating the same endurance that had carried Londoners through centuries of fire, plague, and war. Public response, emergency coordination, and community solidarity highlighted the persistence of civic resilience that had defined the city since Roman times. By the early 21st century, London had grown into a city of nearly 9 million people, spanning ancient streets, modern skyscrapers, and suburban expanses. Its history was layered in stone, timber, brick, and steel, each era leaving its mark. The Thames remained a constant thread, flowing past sites of destruction and renewal alike, a witness to 2 millennia of ambition, suffering, and reinvention. The trajectory of London across these centuries demonstrates a recurring pattern: vulnerability and adaptation, catastrophe and renewal. Each era, Roman, medieval, Tudor, Victorian, wartime, and modern, added depth and complexity, weaving together commerce, culture, and governance. London's identity has never been static. It absorbs shock, endures upheaval, and emerges transformed, yet recognizable. Through fire, plague, war, and social change, the city's essence persists, reflected in the river that has always shaped its life. The Thames flows quietly at dusk. Its surface mirrors the glass towers of Canary Wharf, the dome of St. Paul's, and the remnants of medieval walls. Alike, beneath its gentle ripples lie the echoes of centuries: Roman barges laden with amphorae, Viking longships gliding past timbered wharves, East India Company vessels carrying spices and tea, the black hulls of industrial steamers, and the emergency launches of wartime rescue boats. Each layer of water and stone tells the same story. London endures. The city is defined less by the disasters it has suffered than by the resilience those disasters demanded. Fires, plagues, invasions, bombings. Each left scars, yet each also catalyzed transformation. The Great Fire of 1666 rebuilt streets in brick and widened lanes. The Black Death altered labor and social hierarchies. The Blitz forged collective endurance, civil organization, and civic identity. In every age, catastrophe illuminated what London could survive and what it could become. From Roman Londinium to the modern metropolis, London has been a city of paradox. Wealth beside poverty, authority beside rebellion, destruction beside reinvention. Its power has flowed through commerce along the Thames, through legislation in Westminster, and through the courage of ordinary people who lived, worked, and rebuilt amid adversity. London's history is not merely a timeline of events. It is a testament to human adaptability and the unyielding persistence of civilization. The symbolic constant, the Thames, reflects this truth. It is both witness and participant, carrying the city's burdens and its ambitions. It reminds us that permanence is not in buildings, empires, or even governments. It is in the continuity of life, in the resilience of people, and in the steady flow of history itself. London is more than a place. It is a living chronicle of human endurance, a city where power, plague, and progress converge, and where every stone and wave whispers the same lesson. Freedom, ingenuity, and perseverance can outlast even the fiercest fire. This is London. 2,000 years of history, survival, and transformation, flowing as steadily as the river that defines it.